Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Okay, well, this is a video that I am simultaneously nervous and excited about. I think there's something very cathartic about talking about books that you didn't like, but also slightly terrifying because you know that some people love these books. And I do think that I have a few books on here that my opinion is definitely unpopular. So if you don't want to hear me rant about your favorite book, please click away because this is going to be the one video that I make where I'm going to allow myself to be negative if I need to. But also, I'm not really super negative. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. So the books I'm talking about today are books that have stuck with me throughout this year as being some of the worst books that I've read this year. Some of them were DNFs, some of them were 1 star, actually only one. Some were 2 star, I even have a 3 star in here. And I feel like I was gonna try and keep these just to like books that were 2 stars or DNFs or whatever. And then I thought, well, maybe it'll just be books that I found disappointing that were higher, but then I thought, no, the ones that I really want to talk about in this video are books that, to me, were some of the worst books that I had read this year. So that's what we're going to do. And as always, I'm not saying that, if you love these books, that's totally fine. Undoubtedly, our reading experiences, our reading opinions are shaped by our life experiences. So what works for somebody else might not work for me. All that disclaimer stuff, okay? So let's go ahead and get into it. So one of the earliest books that I rated negatively this year was That Scandalous Evening. I gave this book 1 star. I absolutely hated this book. I read this book for a book club that I used to be in, and wow, did I ever hate this book. This hero in this book was so obsessed with the size of his dick that it was honestly just so off-putting. And this had such an interesting setup for the story. The heroine is an artist, and she has just become enamored with this man, and just, like, his physical presence. Like, she is just, like, so enamored with how he looks, and she's so drawn to him. Like, she feels so much desire for him that she decides she's going to sculpt him. And in doing so, she ends up sculpting his entire body in the nude, including his man parts. And she's never seen those on a man before, so she doesn't really know what they look like, and so she sculpts him with like a really teeny tiny penis. Really, really very small. And at a ball one night, another girl who kind of was out to get her and did a really mean girl thing, unveiled this sculpture for everyone to see. And the artist, the heroine, she didn't intend for anyone to see the sculpture. It was really just her own personal passion project because of her obsession with this guy. And the hero, the guy who she sculpted, was at this ball, and he sees this unveiled, and he immediately notices that she gave him a really tiny peen. And boy, did that upset him. And it sets off this chain of events where they end up caught together, like he's determined to prove to her that he actually has a really big one, and she was like wrong. And so then she ends up like years and years and years pass. Her season was ruined. She ends up a spinster. She's in the process of helping her niece like come out and chaperone her, and the hero meet up again, right? And he's determined he's gonna like prove to her that he's got a big one. It's honestly, like it sounds like a comedy. Like, honestly, I feel like this could have been done comedic so great, but it just wasn't. And, like, the thing that I really hated about this wasn't even so much that he was obsessed about the size of his dick. It was the way that he treated her. Like, it was all geared towards stroking his ego. Every interaction that they had together was all about, look how big I am. Look at how big I am, okay? Like, can you fix what you've done? Because I'm actually very well hung. And it just, no. And she was so obsessed with him that she, like, continued to take his abuse and never, ever concerned herself with her desires or her feelings. Like, their intimacy exchanges were, like, clinical and just, like, bleh, like, they were just bad. I hated this book so much. And that's not to say that, like, this couldn't have worked in a different way, but it was honestly just so poorly executed. There was no chemistry between them. It was all a battle of trying to prove that he had big dick energy, and it was just like, no. Like, I literally hated this book so much. It was a 1 star. It's the only book I've given 1 stars. Hated it so bad. Okay, and this next one is a fan favorite. And I've talked about it a lot, so I'm going to talk about it again, because it really sticks out to me as a book that I really disliked this year, and that's Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. I gave this book 2 stars. Originally, I gave it 3 stars, and the reason I gave it 3 stars is really because I know how much this book means to other readers, and I didn't want to take away from that reading experience. But this is my review, and the more that I thought about it, the more angry that I got, and so I ended up giving it 2 stars. So this is a pretty popular book. It's a contemporary romance. The heroine is a plus-size heroine, and she does cosplay for this really famous TV show that's like based on Greek mythology. It's sort of a Game of Thrones-esque type of situation. And she also writes fan fiction for it. She's on this fan fiction message board with other, people, characters. One of the people that she's friends with in that message board is actually the actor, who she doesn't know he's the actor, who plays a character in the show. So she dresses up, cosplays as a character, a plus-size character in this show. Her pictures go viral. She starts to get a lot of hate because she is plus-size. The hero sort of steps in and offers to take her out to dinner, show her a good time, and I thought that was a really beautiful gesture. But there was, honestly, the reason I gave this book 2 stars is that it was so overly focused on how negative her relationship was with her body, with food, with exercise. It felt like it was all drawn towards that, and it wasn't empowering in any way as I thought that it should be or could be. It was very, very, very negative about that. It even had a big focus on how that affected her relationship with her and her parents, and it just made the reading experience so unenjoyable for me. But there was also this big thread in here that the author wrote into this that was the heroine having this big issue with the hero and the way that he focused on his nutrition and working out and fitness, and how that was just so vain and just so stupid, and I don't know, it was just such a negative and sort of abusive type of relationship that she had with him working out, and I just really hated it. So I just felt like it was just cringy to me, and it was just painful the way that she was talking about her body, thinking about her body, and I just really didn't like that. So 2 stars for this one. Okay, another book that I gave 2 stars, which was super disappointing to me, was When Ashes Fall by Marnie Mann. This is a contemporary romance, and I picked this up because I heard that it was angsty, it was emotional, it was gonna rip your heart out, and y'all know I really like all those things, I'm a big fan of that. But the real selling point was that it was a love triangle, and honestly, I really like those. I know it's unpopular, I feel like they're definitely out of fashion, but I really like love triangles, and the blurb on this was basically that she says, "I'm in love with 2 men, but I can only have one," and I was instantly like, I haven't read a good love triangle in a really long time, let's do this. And it was so disappointing. There was a plot device in here that was very obvious from the beginning of the book. The blurb is extremely misleading. This is not a love triangle. This is very tragic, very sad. It does have a happily ever after, but I was so upset that it promised something that didn't deliver on that I was just my whole reading experience of this was ruined. So, spoiler right here, if you don't want to be spoiled, mute me for a minute. So it's basically not a love triangle. It's the heroine has a love with this man. They have this deep, passionate love. He dies, and she starts dating this other guy while still having visions or dreams of her former lover who died. And I was just no, I just didn't like it at all. It was so disappointing, but I also felt like the writing wasn't really solid. The romance was too fast and also a little confusing, but it was just I was disappointed. So I was sad about this one. 2 stars. Okay, the next book that was disappointing for me was actually one that I picked up because of TikTok, and there are a couple of books on here because of TikTok that honestly were so disappointing. They're just bad. They were just bad, and this was one of them, and it's Rejected. This is a paranormal romance. I was hearing really good things, that this was steamy and a little taboo, a little fated mates. I was really, really, really excited about how this story was going to progress. But wow, was this ever terrible. This book was so bad. The writing was all over the place. The world building was terribly non-existent. The romance was just weird. They had this fated mate bond, but then they didn't, and then she was rejecting it, and it was just like, it was a chaotic mess. This book didn't make any sense at all. There was nothing compelling about it. It was literally painful to get through. And the only reason that I even got through it is because I'm like, look, this has got to get better at some point, because this, everybody is talking about this book. And it just didn't. No, it was terrible. 2 stars. Don't recommend. Okay, now this book really honestly made me pretty sad because I had very high expectations for this book. And sadly, they were not met. And that is Beguiling the Beauty by Sherry Thomas. I have read one of Sherry Thomas's historical romances before this, and I really, really liked it. I felt like it was a really interesting blend of a little bit of a melancholy theme, but ultimately hopeful. It was very seductive. It was very beautiful. The one that I read before was The Luckiest Lady in London, which I really liked. This book, however, it had such great potential. Like, I love Sherry Thomas's writing. I think she's a very gifted writer. I think she has a really good grasp on, like, writing some really angsty, emotional books, and I love that so much. But because I love angst and emotional turmoil, I really have a lot hanging on that HEA. Like, if the HEA is satisfying to me, I can go through, honestly, just about any amount of angst, as long as I am promised a very satisfying happily ever after. And I did not get that here. Like, this setup is really, really interesting. We have this heroine who is extremely beautiful, like Helen of Troy level of beautiful. And the hero spots her across the room one night, and he is just, like, struck dumb with her beauty. And he is determined to have her, thinks that she's a widow. Come to find out, she's actually not a widow, she's married, and he just pines for her forever. He actually ends up meeting her current husband one night, and they have this conversation, and her current husband is like, hey, I saw you admiring my wife. I noticed that, you know? And he was like, whoa, 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 I'm sorry. And her current husband is like, well, maybe you'll have your chance at her after all. The next day, it's let known that her current husband committed suicide, and the hero, who was, like, admiring her from afar, sort of spreads this rumor that she is the one who was responsible for him committing suicide because of that comment that he made to him the night before. So they end up meeting in secret, the heroine and the hero, later on. Not in secret, they end up meeting on a ship, a ship. They're coming back to England. And she recognizes him immediately as the one who has been spreading that rumor. She's wearing a mask. He does not know that's who she is. And they start this passionate love affair. When it is revealed that she is actually the woman that he was lusting after, they end up in a compromised situation, forced to marry. He's so incredibly cruel to her when he realizes who she is and that she's been keeping the secret from him. Like, he is very cruel to her. Like, big time. Very cold, very icy, just says things that are just intended to hurt her about her husband and about everything. And they had kind of started to have feelings for each other because she was masked and, you know, like, they were having this big physical connection. So I was on board with all of that, and I was ready to see them get together, and I was like, how is this going to work? How am I going to really know that they love each other and that they've moved past this? And they did get a happily ever after, but to me, it wasn't satisfying enough to make up for how cruel to her he was earlier. Like, it was a very quick happily ever after. The ending was too quick. There wasn't enough emotional payoff for the turmoil that I had been through before. So 2 stars for this. Super disappointed. Okay, now this book is actually a 3-star book, but I'm including it on here not because it's necessarily a terrible book, but it was one that sticks out to me as being really disappointing for me, and it's Marriage for One. This book is so highly spoken of. Like, I was positive I was going to love it. I've heard it was a slow burn. I love slow burns. I heard it was a grumpy sunshine. I love that so freaking much. I was so ready for that. I was just like, I'm all into this, you know? And I'd been anticipating it for a while before I finally read it, because I've been hearing about this book forever, and then I was finally like, okay, now is the time we're going to read this. So the thing where this book fell short for me, this is basically a sort of a modern day marriage of convenience, where has this dream of running this bakery shop, and then all of a sudden her funds fall through when the guy she was engaged to disappears. She's got this arrangement. She needs to be married or whatever to get this money to put her bake shop into business. And Jack, our hero, steps in and says, well, let's just get married, and then you can still have your bake shop. You can have the money, you know? And it just seemed like he says he has his reasons for wanting to do that. It seemed really like not valid enough for me. Like I couldn't really understand why he was doing all of this for this girl, you know, that he supposedly didn't even know, and why he was so invested in her. He was also, you know, definitely grumpy and cold with her, and I just didn't really understand. So I was hoping for, like, when it was revealed why he wanted to marry her in the first place, it would be like a really good reason. And it just wasn't. It was really very surface level. It really was just like, what? Like, I was just sort of like, that's your reason for marrying this girl? Like, I don't know. It seems suspicious. Seems a little sussy to me, you know? So I didn't really love that. But also another thing that was really disappointing to me that nobody had mentioned that I had heard, and like I don't expect everyone to mention everything that is triggering for other people, but there is a really dark side plot in this book where the heroine undergoes some major health concerns, and like it's very scary what might be happening to her, and so she undergoes a lot of medical testing, and I really did like how the hero was by her side during that, but it was like it just cast this really dark light over this that I thought was going to be this, you know, grumpy sunshine sweet romance, but there's this threat of she might be dying, you know, and I, as somebody who has undergone a lot of medical testing, and like that idea of am I dying, is something really wrong with me, was like really scary to me, and I didn't really want to go and revisit that. So if I had known that was sort of a side plot in here, I would have totally skipped it, because I just really don't want to read that. So this book isn't terrible. I'm not saying it's the worst book I've ever read, not like Rejected, but it was definitely super disappointing to me, and I think that's largely because I had it so hyped up in my head. Okay, now we are on to the DNFs that I have. So now, a lot of the times I will DNF if I'm just bored. Sometimes so a lot of times when I read a book, and I know it has a trope in there that usually never works for me, or is a trope that I tend to avoid, if I'm feeling like a lot of people are really loving this book, it's getting really great reviews, there's a lot of hype surrounding it, I will try that book, even if I know it has a trope that I hate, because I really want to see if that author can make that trope work for me, because sometimes they can, you know, and those are the books that always just like stick with me and that I love so much. So this book, Forget Me Not, was a book that I DNF'd, and it was for exactly that reading. This book has cheating in it as a trope. That's typically something that I will always avoid. Like I don't want to read about that in my romances at all. It's very hard for me to see that hero in a romantic, trustworthy light once I know he's betrayed the heroine. So I just tend to avoid those in general. But I do have 2 books that have cheating in them as a main plot device that I absolutely love. One of them is Blockshot by Kennedy Ryan. Another one is the Candy Steiner duet, like What He Doesn't Know. I love both of those books, and cheating is a huge element of those. So I had heard a lot of buzz around this book. I had heard a lot of people were loving it, and I really wanted to try it because I wanted to see if the author could get me on board with this. Sadly, that didn't happen. Now, I am not going to say that this book isn't for anybody, right? I know a lot of people love this book, and some people don't have any problems with cheating as a trope, right? So the specific reason why this didn't work for me is how the hero cheated and how the focus was so much on him and his pain. The basic premise of this is going to be a spoiler. If you don't want to know, don't watch. But him and his wife, they were married, cheating in a marriage. Like the author's really going to have to do some work to get me around that, you know. Another book that has cheating as a trope that I actually really love and is one of my favorite books of all time is Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean. So, the hero and the heroine are trying to have a baby. She gets pregnant, and she miscarries their baby. And he cheats on her after she miscarried because she wasn't able to meet his needs. Maybe it was emotional needs, maybe it was physical needs. In any case, he cheats in a moment when they are grieving, when she is grieving, specifically, the death of their child. And honestly, it's going to take a whole lot for an author to get me behind a hero who will cheat on his wife after she miscarried their child. And maybe that's because I've been in that place before, and I've been in that dark place, and I cannot imagine my husband doing that to me. Like, if he had added that pain onto the pain of a miscarriage, we would never recover from that, you know? So that's really why I hated this book. But I was still hopeful. Like, I kind of kept reading because I was hoping that maybe I wanted to see how it worked, you know? Like, I wanted to see how this was such a favorite of other people's, but it just didn't work for me, you know? Like, it felt very much like the hero ends up getting amnesia. He doesn't remember cheating on his wife, and it's they're trying to get back together, you know? So I was really wondering how that was going to happen, but he just seemed to be taking on the role of a victim so much without really recognizing his wife's pain or his ex-wife's pain. Like, it was just too much for me. It was a no, and yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Okay, this book is kind of painful too. I never actually talked about this book this year because I was given an arc of this book, and I really, really hate ranting and raving about an arc that I received that I didn't love. I feel so bad about that. But this book is The Savage and the Swan. I had such high expectations for this book. I felt like the premise of it was so incredible. Like, Swan Princess meets Rumpelstiltskin. I was like, oh, yes! I love both of those fairy tales so much. Like, I was so freaking hyped for this one. The author sent me an arc. I was so ready for it. I started reading it, and right away I could tell that this author's writing style wasn't for me. The world building was really not developed well enough. The characters seemed to do that thing that I talk about that I hate, where they just do overdramatic things all of the time. There was no subtlety or no nuance to their character development, to their relationship building. There was something specific that happened with the heroine's father that involved the hero, and it just seemed like, how in the world is she going to really have a romantic relationship with this guy she doesn't even know after he did that to her father? And it was just really disappointing. Like, really a lot. So I tried to get through this. I love the premise. I want a spicy, steamy, adult fantasy romance like this so bad, but it just didn't work for me, not even a little bit. DNF'd it. Okay, now this book is also a painful one. Honestly, I feel like a lot of these are just painful. Like, I'm not even mad. I'm just sad and, like, hurt that I didn't love these books because I wanted to. This one is Only When It's Us by Chloe Leese. So this is not the first book I read by Chloe Leese. I actually read her newest book in the Bergman Brothers series, the one with the purple cover. I can't even remember what it's called. I'll put a picture of it right here. I read that book as an arc. I loved it so much. I just felt like the chronic illness representation was beautiful. I loved their romance. I just thought it was fantastic. I gave that book 5 stars. So I went back to the beginning of her series because I was so impressed with that last book, and I started Only When It's Us. And y'all, I really hated this book. I hated this book a lot. I hated it. And the reason that I hated it was really because of how the heroine treated the hero because he was deaf, and how she felt like she was maybe owed or obligated to him disclosing certain things about treatments that he had received, hearing aids he had received. She felt kind of shocked and betrayed, and they didn't even really have a relationship at this point. They were not even friends. This is sort of an enemies to lovers situation, and he all of a sudden gets hearing aids one day because, you know, I can't even remember why, but suddenly has hearing aids, and she doesn't know. And so she's talking about stuff, and he overhears her. She doesn't think he can hear her, and she gets all mad and loses it and takes it out on him. And that was so disappointing to me. It just felt like I really hated the deaf representation in here. My son is partially deaf. He only has hearing in one ear. And honestly, anything that has to do with deaf people and their representation is something that I'm super sensitive to. I felt like this was very poorly handled. I really did not like how the heroine treated the hero because of the way that he dealt with and lived with his deafness and how that affected her, which I think is a really gross concept, to have a character base their whole experience on how a disabled person is managing their life. Like, I just really didn't like that. But also, in general, I really didn't like just the whole enemies to lovers setup. It seemed really weak, seemed really shallow, didn't make sense to me. Really didn't like the heroine. Now, I will say, I know this author has gone back in. She had a sensitivity reader to improve the deaf representation in here, so I've heard that it's gotten better. I will not be reading it in the future. I just have such a bad taste in my mouth from the first time I started reading this that I'm like, nope, I'm done. I am interested in reading more from this author. I want to continue the series, books 2 and 3. I've heard those are really good, but this one was one of those books that enraged me so much, and I just, DNF'd it. Okay, the next book that I DNF'd is the Zodiac Academy. This book is, again, a very popular TikTok book. Like, people rave about this one. I hated it so bad. I DNF'd this book. This book is basically around, it's not a high school setting, but it feels so immature. It feels like it's set in high school, like a very young high school, but it's supposed to be like college at a boarding school for like fantasy people, like fae, elves, and different types of fantasy creatures. And there's twin women who are the main characters, and there's also like a bully romance aspect of it, which just like, it seemed so juvenile to me, like so juvenile. This is one of those books, I'm sorry if you love it, I hated it so bad. It was so juvenile. It was so immature. It was so shallow. Nothing really made sense. I really hated the bully aspect. He was like rude to her for like, why? Like, I didn't really understand. There was no reason for him to be such a bully to her. And I'm just like, if you're going to get me on board with a bully romance, you got to give me a great reason why he's acting like that towards her. And it was just not there in this one. This book was just like, whew. I read like 22% or something and I DNF'd it because I was like, no. This is just not for me. Really didn't like it. Maybe it is because I'm an old lady, but like this is not it. This is shallow, not developed, not nuanced. Didn't like it. Okay, another book on here that I DNF'd is Dangerous Temptation by Gianna Darling. So really the reason that I DNF'd this book, I didn't read very much of it. This was one of her newer releases in the year. I also got an arc of this and I DNF'd it. But the romance is about the heroine, who I think is like 17 at the time, and the hero is much older than her. He is her mother's boyfriend, which like taboo is fine, honestly. One of my favorite books of the year is a very taboo age gap romance, but like it was just like honestly so gross to me, like how she was like talking about how much she was lusting after him and her physical response. Like it was so, it was just like icky to me. It was so icky to me. It felt just like, I also didn't really love the writing in this. Like again, like I felt like the writing was hedging into over dramatic way too often and shifting back to like nothing. And so that like this area where there should be like nuance and more room for discussion and development was like, nope, it's not here. It's just, oh, she's lusting after him and he's like such a dick to her. Like he is such a jerk. Like so mean for no reason, really. Like, again, this is another case of why? You need to give me a reason for that type of behavior, or I'm just sort of like, I don't understand why you're lusting after him. Like, the guy's not great. He's your mom's boyfriend, and like, what? I don't know. Didn't like this one at all. It felt a little bit like it leaned into the titillation aspect of it too much, and anything that could have been like nuanced or growth in the characters was just like, nope. It was just like purely leaning into the taboo element, which I just don't love. Like I need something else, you know, like I love taboo elements, but you need to develop it in a way that has me fully on board and believing it, not just this setup where, oh, I'm so wet for him. Like, no, I don't like it. No. Okay, and the last book on here is a historical romance. It is A Gentleman Undone. This book, I had such high expectations for this because I'd heard really great things from people that I respect and admire. So this book, I think that if I had been in a better frame of mind where I was like really in the mood to just like dissect some writing and like pore over every word. I think I could have really liked this, maybe. But this book did something that I consider to be the cardinal sin in fiction, where, and it is very popular with literary fiction writers, it's extremely pretentious, and it leans heavily into prose and words and thought-provoking sentences, you know? Like, so I feel like this is a little bit of a snobbish historical romance. And that's pretty much it. Like, honestly, the character development in here was, like, so freaking slow. I just couldn't handle it. It was taking so long to get there. The heroine is a courtesan, and she is very, like, she's a card shark. She knows how to do all that stuff. The hero, they end up in this arrangement where he wants to be great at cards and that. And, like, it was so overly wordy and so pretentious that there was literally no story here. There was no story. There wasn't great character development. It was so much focused on the words and how thought-provoking they were and how intellectual it was that I was just like, I cannot handle this right now. So I DNF'd it. I do want to try this author's work again. I ended up buying the whole trilogy, and I want to read them physically and see if I have a different reaction, because I listened to this on audiobook, and boy, did it ever not work for me. Like, it was painfully slow. So freaking slow. And I can get behind a slow story, but there has to be some story. There has to be some character growth. There has to be some type of relationship happening. And there just wasn't. It was so much about cards, and like, it was boring. So, DNF'd that one. All right. There you have it. Those are the worst books that I read this year. I am sorry if I talked about any of your favorites. This is, again, only my opinion, and, you know, that's it. So take it for what it's worth. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I'll see y'all in my next video.